رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ. I would like to thank you, who I do consider a dear brother as well as a scholar, Sheikh Hassan Rabbani, for giving me this opportunity to speak in this venerable workshop that you have organized for students of Deen and scholars to learn and specialize in quite an intensive course on the subject of Ifta and Fatwa. I pay particular gratitude to the Honourable Scholar Dr. Hafiz Muhammad Munir Al-Azhari, as well as yourself, Sheikh Hassan Rabbani, and Dr. Musharraf Al-Azhari, and all the team. I don't know all of the individuals who are behind this project of the British Fatwa Council, but indeed it is a noble endeavour, and I'm sure which will bear many fruits in the coming months and perhaps for many years to come, inshallah ta'ala. So I've been tasked to talk about the ranks of the jurists, of the mujtahideen, tabaqatul mujtahideen, and for this workshop and this course, you have selected the Adab al-Mufti, the manual of Al-Imam Al-Allama Ibn Abidin, who in the Indian subcontinent known as Imam Shami. So for the discussion, I will be using this text, but I will diverge and also be mentioning somewhat briefly some of the other texts that relate to this. We know that the time is quite short, purposely so that we can get quite a lot in over the weekend. So I think I've been given about half an hour. I will also try to take questions as well. The speaker before me, the Sheikh Dr. Abdul Mughith, very comprehensively covered many aspects of Ifta and Fatwa. And in my mind, I was thinking this perhaps lecture should have been at the end because it was so comprehensive in its nature. And he took questions of all manner, whereas mine will be much more specific and perhaps more historical in that sense. But if there is any dialogue or engagement about contemporary issues, I'll be happy to take them in light of what I probably consider is a good way to understand the history of the madhabs, their development, and the way that the structures of authority feature and work within the madhab tradition. So I have a PowerPoint which I will share with you. I do hope that this is going to work. So if you just give me a second to share my screen. Just bear with me a second because it's just an issue in making it full screen at the moment. Okay, I'm able to share the screen, but there's an issue in setting it up as a slideshow because hold on, let's see if this works. Yes, I think we are. So as I said, I'll be speaking as using this as the base text, the Manzuma of Al-Imam As-Sayyid Muhammad Amin Al-Shahid Ibn Abidin. And we know that there are many such works of this in this genre. The first of which is probably Imam Ibn Salah's work in the Shafi'i school, from which Imam An-Nawawi took from, and he has his own typology of muftis in his introduction to the Al-Majmu', which is the Sharh of Muhadhab in the Shafi'i school. We have Imam Al-Qarafi in the Maliki school. So various compositions of what we call the Adab al-Mufti genre have been composed. You have the Adab al-Qadi genre as well, which is quite similar. And both of these tasks are very noble because the Qadi and the Mufti are those two functionaries of Islamic law. They are practical functionaries of Islamic law that face society. Because the writer jurist writes works and writes legal texts academically and for students of knowledge and for scholars. And you have the teacher jurist who is teaching students. Of course, all of them are aware of their societal environment, but the most intimate relationship with society, an active relationship with people on the ground reality, is reserved for the Qadi and the Mufti. That's why the role of these two individuals is to pronounce the divine command within the community. So that's why we see the function of the Qadi and the Mufti is somewhat more practical relative to those other legal functionaries in terms of the other Fuqaha that has already been talked about in the previous session. And as we know, the Mufti's opinion is an opinion. It's not legally enforceable like that of the Qadi, which is a judgment. And the Qadi has executive power, whereas the Mufti does not have executive power, but is an opinion based on expert knowledge of the scholar. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because that's not really what my topic is. And I think on all of these issues, we can have a whole session about, who is the Mufti and what is a fatwa, but that's not what I will be doing today. I'm going to be talking about the ranks of the jurists. And Allama ibn Abidin here has a typology of mujtahids. Some people call this a typology of muftis, which is in some ways similar and in some ways different. And a caveat that I'd like to start with also is that we must make a difference also between a mujtahid and the practice of ijtihad. I'll elaborate on that a bit more later. I mean, at the moment we would just feel like, ijtihad and ism fa'il is mujtahid, one that does ijtihad is a mujtahid, which is quite right. But there is some more nuance that needs to be explored here, and I will be going through that. So, in the Manzuma, which is the poem of Allama ibn Abidin al-Shami, which is in 74 lines, if you include the Basmala. No, Dr. Mark Saab mentioned 73 because he was being, a good person of the madhab here, that in the Quran we don't include Bismillah in our counting without tamthil and tashbih to the Quran. Of course, this is the Manzuma of Ibn Abidin. And he has the commentary on it, which is the Sharh al-Manzuma, as you can see here on the screen, known as the Uqud Rasmi al-Mufti, the chaplets of the Mufti's task, or the gems, or whichever way you want to translate it. I'm not providing a final translation here. So the Manzuma itself, then its commentary, and then he has another work on Urf. These three works together, I would say, are Allama ibn Abidin's contribution or intervention into Ifta in his contemporary age and the work of a Mufti. And his work on Urf is very significant and very important. I'm going to be saying a little bit about development of Islamic law in the contemporary age and the accusation that Islamic law had stopped and ceased to develop. So these three works are very important. You can find them in the Rasail, his Rasail works, in terms of Allama ibn Abidin's contribution to the field of Ifta, Fatwa given, and the development of Islamic law and its response to the changing circumstances of the ground reality, which I will talk about. So let's delve into the categories. I will try to be a little bit quick with the description and perhaps move towards more analysis, if that's okay with the organizers. I know our senior scholar here, Dr. Musharraf Hussain, have already quickly went through them. If I knew that he has had his presentation prepared, then maybe I wouldn't have put this together last night. I won't tell you what time. But anyway, I've done it anyway, and I've summarized it. I've not completely translated from Allama ibn Abidin, but I've tried to summarize them and give some of the key points here of each of the categories. So the first tabqa, the first rank in the typology, I'll be saying a little bit more about what is the purpose and objective behind this typology as well towards the end. So just bear with me for a minute as I go through the description. He gives it in the plural, I've given it in the singular, just because we are used to this title of Al-Mujtahid al-Mutlaq. So the first rank, or in the hierarchy of the jurists, is the absolute Mujtahid, or Al-Mujtahid fi al-Shari, sometimes referred to as Al-Mujtahid al-Mustaqil or Al-Mujtahid al-Mutlaq. So what is the Mujtahid fi al-Shar? And just by way of introduction to this particular category and ijtihad itself, we do know that ijtihad takes place in cases and situations of dhann, of conjecture, where there is nas and there is categorical proof and evidence, where we have nasus qat'iyya, then there is no ijtihad. Ijtihad takes place in the first place where there is dhann, conjecture. And it is the job of the mujtahid then that in places where the information that we have from the sources is not categorical, to exercise their independent opinion, their independent judgment. And I teach a course here in Exeter University on Islamic law, and I often ask the students, what do we mean by independent when we use this phrase independent or mustaqil? And they're often wondering, because they've used this word a lot in our daily usage, but we don't often remember how simple it is in its meaning. That independent basically means one that is not dependent on others. One that is not dependent on others is independent, informing their judgment. So the quality of a mujtahid is that this individual is qualified and so has the necessary criteria and qualifications. I think somebody else is going to cover this topic, and also has sincerity in making those judgments. And in this particular case of category 1, is not dependent on others to form their own opinion. And the independent mujtahid is independent both in ahkam, both in the rulings themselves, and also the principles and the methodology behind those rulings, that they are not dependent and not in need to refer to anybody else, because if they are in need to refer to another mujtahid or scholar, then that removes their total independence. That's why they no longer remain al-mujtahid al-mutlaq, because they are still dependent on another scholar, another mujtahid, to derive their opinions. Therefore, that would jeopardize their independence. So they are independent in both the usul and in both the furu'. I'd just like to say to Sheikh Hassan al-Rabbani, if anything comes through as a question that I need to answer in between, I don't have the chat window open. Please just unmute your mic and do ask, or I can take them at the end if there is time. Okay. So they are independent and they do not rely on anybody else. And an example of that is the 4 Imams of the 4 famous or there were many other madhahib, that's why it's those 4 Imams and others who established schools. And we know that there were many other schools and many other founders of schools, so-called founders of schools. Those schools did not last. They either just fizzled out or they amalgamated with other schools. And we have 4 extant schools of Sunni jurisprudence remaining. And those 4 are what are considered al-mujtahideen. Now, a question may come up that, and there are criticisms, by the way, I was going to mention this towards the end, but maybe I bring it in now. There are some criticisms about this typology and of muftis and mujtahids. Allama ibn Abidin Minnow has given 7, and I should have mentioned this at the start, is that Allama ibn Abidin takes this ranking, it's not his own ranking, it's actually taken from Imam Ibn Kamal Pasha, the great Ottoman Shaykh al-Islam, great scholar in many, many different fields, not just only the Islamic sciences, but also in political science as well. Some of you may be aware of him. He was appointed as Shaykh al-Islam by Suleiman the Magnificent, Suleiman Qanuni. And he passed away in 1536, a great Hanafi scholar. So this ranking of Allama ibn Abidin has been taken from Ibn Kamal Pasha. Others, when they have done their categorizations, have as few as 3. Some have 5, or in case of Nawawi, he has 3 with 2 further subcategories, which makes 5. So you see 3, 5, or 7. And it is not an exact science. And you'll see why here when I'm going to just talk about the 40 marks. It's not exact science that you can make each category to a particular type of mujtahid. Some of them are contested. Some of them are disputed, debated about who should belong in which rank, and whether there should be 7 or there should be how many. So towards the end, maybe we may question how useful and fruitful it is to have these rankings of the mujtahids, and then perhaps I find a response favoring the reason why we have this particular ranking. And we must also think and ponder further why Imam Ibn Abidin chose this particular one. from Ibn Kamal Pasha. So one of the issues here, or one of the criticisms, is why would we say these four are the mujtahids who can do ijtihad al-itlaq? And what about the students of Imam Abu Hanifa, which will come in the next category? Why are they not mujtahids in the absolute sense? So we look at them and then we will answer that question. So the mujtahid who is a mujtahid in the madhab is one that does not exercise absolute ijtihad. And I would also say here that in this first category is the category of absolute ijtihad, and all of those that come after this are dependent in some way or another. Okay, they are muntasib in some way, muqayyad in one way or another. So the category or the rank of absolute ijtihad is closed with the first one. Following that, all of these following categories are restricted in one way or another. So we call this al-mujtahid al-madhab or al-mujtahid al-muqayyid and other various terms. Sometimes people use muntasib for the third one onwards. Me in general, looking at this, I would look at these, any one after the first is muntasib in one way or another, or at least dependent in one way or another. Okay, so what does the mujtahid fil madhab do? They extract rules from those same sources, the usul arba'ah. We know what they are in any usul text. We find at the beginning, the Quran, the Sunnah, the ijma' and the qiyas. So they are able to extract legal rulings, ahkam, furu' from those. But when it comes to the usul, they extract those rulings on the basis of the rules and the principles laid out by the master authority. I've translated Sahib al-Madhab as master authority here, because we know there are more than one authority in the Madhab. It's not, Taqlid is not just following one particular, just following only Imam Abu Hanifa. There's a number of authorities that make up the school. Well, this is something actually one needs clarification, hopefully towards the end of the statement, that we only follow Imam Abu Hanifa, we only follow the master authority. That's quite right, that statement, but it needs to be qualified. So they establish ahkam and extract rules, but on the principles established by the master authority. So they cannot diverge from the methodology established by the master authority. In the case of the Hanafi school, it's Imam Abu Hanifa. But in terms of ahkam and rulings, they can differ. They can differ in terms of the substantive laws, but not in terms of the principles and the methodology of deriving those substantive rulings. Examples here are Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, and other ashab, with students. I've gone for companions rather than pupils here, as that's the term used, of Imam Abu Hanifa, and radiyallahu ta'ala anhum for all of them. If you don't see it written here in the Arabic, it's of course intended that may Allah be pleased with all of them and raise their ranks even further in paradise. So why is Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, why are they not included in the ranks of absolute ijtihad when we see that they would have students that are at that rank? Here's an objection. So we know, for example, that Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani taught Imam al-Shafi'i. Imam al-Shafi'i is one of the four Imams, was mentioned here by Ibn Kamal Pasha and others, of course. No one would doubt that he's not of that rank. But why then was his teacher not of that rank, who is Muhammad al-Shaybani? And then Imam Abu Yusuf, we know, was a student of Imam Abu Hanifa, but also taught Imam Muhammad. Imam Muhammad is a student of both. The most senior of Imam Abu Hanifa's students is Imam Abu Yusuf. So the answer to that is that they were capable of also establishing their own principles. These scholars and companions of Imam Abu Hanifa had attained the rank of establishing or being able to establish principles and their own independent legal methodology. If they had desired and wished, they could have been founders of their own schools, respectively. But they chose not to do so, and instead rather remained in the methodological framework of their teacher, who they had probably spent the most amount of time with. They had other teachers, of course, as well, as we know. But the teacher that they spent the most amount of their time with, or that they were most inspired by, or that they were most influenced and affected by, It was that school which they adopted for themselves, despite differing in many ahkam. I mean, Imam Ibn Abidin says in some ahkam, and students of knowledge who read books, especially more advanced works in Islamic law, will see that the ikhtilaf of Imam Abu Hanifa's students is vast, actually, is vast. And that happens in many cases of furu, but they remain within the school methodology. So as long as, so what qualifies one to be a Hanafi and a Shafi'i or a Maliki? It's that intisab, that nisbah to the school, which makes one a Hanafi, one a Shafi'i. And that's why the word muntasib makes more sense here, because it's the attribution that they make to the eponym of the school, in this case Imam Abu Hanifa, that makes them Hanafis, despite differing vastly. I mean, I say this with qualification, but just something to think about. That in many ways, all of us Hanafis, or many of us, I think, are Hanafis in the room, there may be exceptions, are in many ways more Hanafi, I think I'm going to get told off by one of the seniors in the group now, are more Hanafi than Al-Imam Abu Yusuf and Al-Imam Muhammad. Because we follow the ittiba and taqlid of the rulings of Imam Abu Hanifa more than these students. I mean this wajhin very specifically, by the way, so please don't be offended. Of course, they are much more close to Imam Abu Hanifa than you could ever be. But in terms of following particular rulings, but they are still Hanafis because they adopt the same methodological, or they work within that same methodological framework. I'm going to say a bit more about this at the end, actually, about what it means to be a Hanafi or a Shafi'i and a Maliki in the context of ijtihad and differing opinions. Okay, so let's move on. So they are capable of ijtihad mutlaq, but they do not exercise that, and they remain within the school, and they work within the school. They establish, especially in the case of Imam Muhammad, writings that belong to the school. In fact, he's the Muharrir al-Madhab. He's the one who wrote down and transcribed, in fact, the rulings of the school. The documenter of the school is Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani. Okay, then we move on to the al-Mujtahid fil Masail. And what does this al-Mujtahid fil Masail means? We probably think that masala here means just a normal legal issue that comes up and any mufti answers. But it means the al-Mujtahid fil Masail in which there is no nas or no legal opinion from the master authority. The word nas is actually quite interesting in the way that it's used for Imam Abu Hanifa. When we see the word nas used in the madhab, it's not used in the sense of an explicit text from the Quran and the Sunnah here. It's a particular term used within the madhab, so in which there is no legal opinion, there is no nas from the master authority. The mujtahid fil masail, those mujtahidun, they are able to extract legal rules in accordance to those principles that are established by Imam Abu Hanifa. So where no legal ruling has been pronounced, they will then mention a legal ruling and pronounce on that in accordance to the principles. Again, very important that they remain within those principles. They are masters of the principles from which Imam Abu Hanifa extracted the laws, and working with those principles, then they are able to derive rulings. In other words, if you follow the same methodology, had Imam Abu Hanifa faced that same question or answered that same question, then he would have given the same answer, presumably, because you are working on with the same methodology as the master, Al-Imam Abu Hanifa here. So these are those what I call Mujtahid Masail, and it links to their works as well. There's not always a direct link, by the way. I think tomorrow, and I do somehow, certainly feel humbled here that I've been selected to give a class in this series because there are great scholars like the preceding scholars who just spoke before me. Tomorrow you have Al-Alama Sayyid Zahid Hussain Al-Ridwi, he's also my teacher. He's going to be talking about the different works in the madhab. So there's a relation between the mujtahid, or what type of mujtahid, and the type of works that they are authoring, like the Nawazil, for example. Would need to be somebody who is a mujtahid in fil masail, that new issues that come up, which we call nawazil, and it's something that scholars have always dealt with. I think Qari Asim just alluded to that as well, that we shouldn't lose sight of that. But then again, when new issues come up, how we deal with them is also a matter of great sensitivity, which I'll try to draw upon in my analysis at the end. So again, one of the differences here, we've said that they adhere to the master authority of the usul, which is Imam Abu Hanifa, and different now. So they are the same in this aspect with the al-mujtahid fil madhab, but where they differ from the mujtahideen fil madhab, like Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, is that when it comes to the furu, they cannot differ from the master authority, from the sahib al-madhab. So even when it comes to the furu, they are not able to differ. That's where they are different to the second category. Okay, so they are similar to the second category in the sense that they adhere to the same principles and the methodology that would be somewhat given, considering they are in the third rank. If the second rank adhere to the usul, then of course by min bab awla, the third rank should adhere to the usul as well. But in furu also they cannot differ. It's only in issues that are not covered by the first two categories that they can differ. Usually in the text of, and you will see this in Ibn Kamal Pasha, that it says Sahib al-Madhab, they cannot differ in furu, but it also means his students here as well. They wouldn't come with a third opinion that is different to Imam Hanifa and the students. And Imams such as Imam al-Khassaf, who's wrote the Khassaf, wrote the Adab al-Qadi, Imam al-Tahawi, Mani al-Asar, Mushkil al-Asar, the commentaries on them, al-Qarahi, the great scholar, Shams al-Aima al-Halwani, Shams al-Aima al-Sarakhsi, and Fakhr Islam al-Bazdawi, and Qadi Khan, and great Imams of the like, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, fall into this category of al-Mujtahid fil Masail. And no doubt very prominent Imams of the school. Okay, move to the fourth category, to the Ashab al-Takhrij. So here now you see that there's a change in terminology. Rather than Mujtahidun or Tabaqat al-Mujtahideen, it's Ashab. So they are not referred, I mean, I've been somewhat more cautious with the writing here. I said they're not referred to as a mujtahid. The reason I've said this is because towards the end I will say that there is an ijtihad type activity which takes place here. And I will answer some accusations that after that third tabqa there was no such thing as independent judgment being exercised. Because again, these things need qualifying and there's great debate and discussion around them. So although they are not referred to as mujtahidun, they have, however, mastered the principles and the basis of extracting those principles. What is the basis of those usul and the usul themselves? So even though we refer to them as muqallid, do not take them lightly. So they can do things such as express the mujmal as mufassal. So where there is brevity, they can provide extrapolation and detail of those rulings that are mentioned in a brief form, or they are dhu wajhain. In other words, two possibilities exist within a statement. And see which of the statement, which of the possibilities is the more likely, or is the stronger, or is the one that should be relied upon. So that's the task of the Ashab al-Takhrij. And an example is given of Al-Imam al-Jassas al-Razi here as one such type who falls within this category. So we move on to the fifth type here, which is again, ashab, not referred to as mujtahid, but ashab as a muqallid. And they are tarjih from the term. You probably already assumed that they give preference and preponderance to one narration over another. And Imams such as Imam al-Quduri, al-Marghinani, major texts within the school, authors of these texts are considered as such. And below them is a rank which is quite similar in many ways. They are able to distinguish between the strongest, strong, and weak, and other classifications, and they are very familiar with all those terminologies used in the school and what they mean from the earliest scholars and authors such as of those mukhtasarat and those great core texts of the madhab like Kanz al-Daqaiq, Dur al-Mukhtar, al-Biqaya. So scholars such as Ibn Nujaym and so on are able to, and Imam al-Hasqafi are, you can look at those texts and reliably see that the authoritative opinions of the madhab are contained within those epitomes of Islamic law, according to the Hanafi school, because they do not include weak and rejected opinions within them and statements. So these are the depended al-mukhtasarat al-mu'tabara of the school, which are used as often as teaching texts or as base texts for commentaries and super commentaries, So again, although this is the sixth category, do not take these scholars lightly. These are books from which fatwas are given in the school because of the fact that scholars have relied upon them century after century. Okay, the seventh category then is that of the muqallid. And Allama Ibn Kamal Pasha refers to them in not so glowing words as just nighttime wood gather, the Hatibul Layl. And you would see that when you come to this seventh category, it does appear to be as quite, I mean, in some ways it may appear to someone as disparaging or even undermining them or not seeing them in any great regard as scholars, but that's certainly not the case. The category of the muqallid is vast and wide, and Allama Ibn Abidin dedicates many points of commentary on the muqallid mufti. So here, the muqallid is not just a mere individual. We're talking about, of course, there's muqallid who is not a mufti, and there's a muqallid who's a mufti or a naqil mufti. Because by this time, and it's pretty amazing that in the time of Ibn Kamal Pasha already, who passed away in 1536, great mufti, Ibn Kamal Pasha actually was referred to as Muftiul Jinni wal Ins or Muftiul Insi wal Jinn in his time because of his great fortitude and expertise when it came to fatwa writing. I mean, he was one of the greatest muftis of his time, but despite doing so, in their times, these scholars would even refer to themselves as just being mere muqallids, and their responsibility was to just narrate the opinion of the school. One of the things I'd like to just say here, that being a naqil mufti is no easy task. People just think, oh, well, you're just a copyist or just somebody who copies and duplicates the opinions of what went on before. And for those of you who are scholars in here, and I think many of you are, will know the difficult task it is in actually even finding the opinion in a, I'm not sure why these marks are coming on the presentation here. So, it's not from my side. What a difficult task is to actually be able to find the correct source, first of all, to identify the correct source. I'm not going to go into this because this is probably somebody else's topic in terms of the Mufti, is to be able to identify what the correct source is from which to give a fatwa, and then within that source, how to find the correct and the right opinion. And then, of course, there's the whole idea of application, which was by the former esteemed speaker. But when it comes to Ibn Kamal Pasha, he's referring to these people. These people are those that even don't know their right from their left. Might appear as quite disparaging, but it's not. It's in comparison to the other six. And the main point here being is that once you are a muqallid, then in no way are you able to exercise any form of independent judgment that differs from the first six categories. That's what it means. When it comes to new issues and qiyas, that's a different issue. The Sheikh before me already talked about that, and we can talk about that more in the question and answer session. So this is the seventh one. I've just left it as one line. There's a bit of a longer description by Allama Ibn Abidin, but I thought that the reference to Hatibul Layl is sufficient here. What the muqallid is. So anyone not from those six categories, and examples have been defined who those six are, so no one can try to enter into those categories by their own will and assume one of those categories of which they have. Everybody else, and Imam Ibn Abidin says, in his time, everyone now is of this rank of just a muqallid, the mere muqallid as you call them. In other words, they have no ability to exercise their own ijtihad. Now, let's just say a few things just to close here. If I've gone over time, please do let me know, Sheikh Hassan. I don't have the chat screen open, so just unmute.
No, that's fine. We've got. I just wanted to leave some time for some Q&A. We've got some interesting questions, and so.
So, should we say about 5 minutes?
Yeah, that's
close. Let's try to provide someone else. I mean, some of you here already know the work of Allama Ibn Abidin very well. You may have read it, studied it. I mean, I studied this formally with a teacher, 1 year iftar course with our teacher, Sheikh Hadith Mufti Fadl Subhan, who I know some of you here have probably also studied with. So we did this as part of a 1 year Mufti course, along with some other texts. So we did study it in some detail. So I'm not going to go in too much about the 7 categories, because when we did this with the Sheikh, we took a long time actually on each of these categories. So that's not what I want to do here. I think you could probably do that in other avenues. I'd like to just provide some analysis about what these 7 categories mean, and what does this mean for ijtihad? What does this mean for the development of Islamic law? Does this mean that Islamic law can no longer develop and no longer can change? What happens when the circumstances change? Is a mufti able to give a fatwa or exercise some kind of ijtihad? I'll preface this small discussion by mentioning the objections of some of the Orientalists. So the Orientalists have seen things like this and other statements from many scholars. I mean, you don't have to just go to an Adab al-Mufti book to look at these principles of iftar and the categories of mujtahids and muftis, but in a lot of longer works of Islamic law, in the introductions, you will find such discussions like this. So the discussion centers around whether or not the gate of ijtihad was closed, right? Is the, insidad bab al-ijtihad, did it become mughlaq, and therefore there was no capacity then to reform and change the law. So some of the Orientalists, which is Joseph Schacht and others, they said that by the beginning of the 4th centuries, all the issues of Islamic law were pretty much settled. And after this time, there was no room and scope for development. Hence, Islamic law had become stagnant, and development of the law was stifled because of this rigidity that took place, because all the rules had become fixed. Therefore, there was no room for disagreement and for change. And this was a wider Orientalist narrative that Islam and Muslim thought ceased to develop and had become stagnant, in contrast to the West, which was thriving and always developing, whereas Islamic thought had become stale because of this enterprise of Taqlid, which was referred to as blind imitation. And we do know that there are some other groups, Muslims in the Islamic world today, who refer to Taqlid as mere blind imitation. We refuse that categorization and that translation. We can talk more about that. And we also know there was a current of modernists, which has also been mentioned by the Sheikh before me, the Sheikh before me. Modernists who also talked about this idea that Islamic law had now become stale and in need of, and in line with contemporary times, we need to abandon Taqlid altogether. The only way that we will be able to keep up with Western thought and the developments that are happening in the Western world is to abandon Taqlid and remove those shackles of blind obedience to the early authorities of Islamic law and start afresh. So you had liberal Islamic modernists in the 19th, 20th century that were also saying similar things. So you have the thought of the Orientalists, you have the thought of Salafis who refer to Taqlid as blind imitation, and also modern liberals who are not of the Salafi kind of mentality, but are calling for a kind of liberation of Islamic law, and in order to be liberated from Islamic law is to remove those shackles of Taqlid, as they call it themselves. So how do we understand and respond to this history of these typologies of muftis and the hierarchies that have been developed? First of all, what Allama Ibn Abidin is doing, and those scholars before him, is that they're establishing a hierarchy of authority. Like we said, there is no fixed categorization or typology of these muftis and these mujtahids. People differ. They might swap around some of the figures in each of them. But the point is not to be fixated on whether there are 7 or 5 or who belongs to who, but it is about establishing a hierarchy of authority within which a mufti must constrain themselves, so that they are not at complete liberty to say whatever they like. They work within a tradition and within a madhab, and that's what the madhabs are. We know that Imam Ahmad Rida Khan and other great late scholars of the Hanafi school as well, and including Imam Ibn Abidin, answer this question, that every opinion of the Hanafi school goes back to Imam Abu Hanifa's statement. And this is quite perplexing when you think Imam Muhammad is differing with, ostensibly differing from Imam Abu Hanifa here. How could this be the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa when he is saying something which contradicts the opinion of his master, and other opinions within the school as well, which the Mutakhirun, for example, have said the fatwa should be based on this. So the opinion of Imam Ahmad Rida Khan and others, and we wrote very eloquently on this, is that every opinion is on the qawl of the Imam. Why? because he says if the Imam Abu Hanifa had existed in their time and was faced with those circumstances, he would have given the same fatwa. He would have given the same fatwa because those scholars gave the opinion on the same methodology of their Imam, but differed in its outcome because of the differing circumstances that they were faced with. And that are these 6 different asbab or 10 that are discussed. We will not have time to talk about that. The other thing I would like to mention here is that any close reader of texts of Islamic law, and usul in particular, would find that whereas in the second category we said this, and mind me just here for revisiting this, that they do not differ in the usul, but only differ on the furu, I would invite you for just a couple of seconds to think, honestly, when you've read these texts, do you find that when they differ in the furu, that there is a difference in the usul? Maybe I should open the chat screen now, actually, so we can make it a little bit interactive. You will find that there is a difference in the usul as well. Bayna ashabu Abi Hanifa wa Abi Hanifa, rahimahumullah. There is a difference of opinion even when it comes to the usul and the methods for extracting those rules. So what's going on here? Again, the issue is that intisab, that even if they differed in the usul, which happens, they themselves did not wish to express this because they always wished and desired to remain within the methodological framework of the Imam. And this is where I would like to look at fiqh and the enterprise of the fiqh activity as something spiritual. And Dr. Musharraf alluded to this. I was pleased that he did because it reminded me of one thing that I wanted to say, that working in the fiqh enterprise and belonging to it should not be seen as a mere dry legalistic activity, but it should also be seen as belonging to a spiritual chain in a school and a spiritual tradition. Which is why spiritually the maqam and the rank of the first one goes beyond just being a mujtahid in the absolute sense, this mujtahid mutlaq. It's the spiritual relationship of acknowledging the absolute authority of the Imam, which is Imam Abu Hanifa. Even though in practice they are differing because their intellectual abilities allowed them to do so. And their judgment based on their reading of the sources allowed them to differ, even in the usul, even though it doesn't say that here. But they still related their opinion, and anything they said, they attributed it back to the Imams. And the scholars of the madhab in the following centuries also attributed everything that they said. I mean, it's quite remarkable. I'm differing with you explicitly, but my difference with you explicitly is also being related back to the founder of the school and the Imam. Well, you're differing explicitly because everything they said, even if it was a difference of opinion, was attributed back to the master authority who they wished to belong to. So how do we understand this? I mean, there's a lot more I can say on this, and I teach this in the master's classes, and we don't have enough time here. We need a lot more time to look at this relationship in the madhab. The way that I would look at this, all of these 7 categories and whatever it is within that and outside that, is you have the position of the Imam Abu Hanifa. Everybody wishes to link back to that. We are Hanafi by name. All of the followers of the madhabs, they are Shafi'i, Maliki, or Hanbali. The name that they acquire is of the eponym. Okay, the nisbah is to the eponym. Okay, it's not, the name of the school is not around the students, although they played a huge role, especially in the Hanafi school, we know. But the role of Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, Imam Zufar, Hassan bin Ziyad, and so on was remarkable. However, we all refer to ourselves with the eponym of the master of the school. We make our attribution to the eponym of the school, who is, in our case, is Imam Abu Hanifa, and all of the Imams did the same. So we acknowledge the authority of the master authority and relate everything back to that master authority. However, that does not mean that nobody went outside of the opinions of the master authority. We see that throughout the school. So we see change happening within that dynamic. There is change, there is disagreement, there is development. It all happens within a restricted form, and that restriction becomes more and more as you move on, so that you remain within those methodological and legal principles of the school, and even the rulings. There is also continuity as well then. So you are establishing continuity throughout the madhab tradition. So 3 terms I'd like you to just consider when we finish this and looking at these 7 categories is authority, and there is a book on this you can read as well by an eminent scholar called Wael Halak, authority, continuity, and change. So the way to understand ijtihad and taqlid is a dynamic relationship between these 3 elements. If you can triangulate them, there is authority within the madhab, of the master authority and other authorities as well, there is continuity. So we remain within that madhab, that tradition. There's a continuation, a continuous thread that ties everybody in the madhab together. However, that thread, if it is broken or one goes without it, then they no longer remain within the madhab, within the folds of the madhab, or they no longer acknowledge the authority of the madhab. But then there is change as well. So how can you have continuity and change together? That's the most important dynamic to think about. That the relationship between ijtihad and taqlid is one of continuity and change, continuity and development. Not mere continuity, which would be blind imitation, or not change, which takes you completely outside the folds of the madhab, because you no longer belong to it. And I'll finish with two summaries of understanding taqlid, not just as mere blind imitation, but something that goes much more profound and beyond that. So we can take one definition of halak here again, who contends that due to the very nature of authority in Islamic law, the processes of continuity and change manifested in the form of taqlid. So continuing and change manifested in what we can call this enterprise, in fact, of taqlid. And what did it include? It included things like the defense of the school as a methodological and interpretive entity. So, ijtihad, as we understand it, is not only ijtihad al-itlaq. When in the madhab you provide justifications for your madhab position and you refute or you answer and you counter the positions of the other school in usul works, I would ask everybody here in the question, do you not see that as original thinking and original reasoning? Yes, we do. So it answers this objective that the Islamic law and merely imitated everything that came before it. No, it didn't. Because you may imitate the opinion that came before you, of the masters that came before you, but you will provide original reasoning and argumentation in order to justify what that opinion is. That is an original argument. That's development of Islamic law. Because you've engaged in an exercise where you have made an original contribution to establish the argument of the school. Okay, so that might be textual arguments, logical arguments. We know there are arguments from grammar and so on. All of these are original arguments. So the function of taqlid includes a defense of the school as a methodological interpretive entity. So you could mechanically reproduce the position of the master authority, which would be Imam Abu Hanifa, or let's say the opinion of Imam Abu Yusuf, and there's again conditions to do so. And that is one way in which taqlid is exercised. And in another way, like we said, there's a full reenactment of legal reasoning and textual evidence. This is, in a way, ijtihadic activity. It's an ijtihadi type of activity. Because while it's not ijtihad in that technical sense of what the Imams established as Ibn Abidin, but to answer these Orientalists who put a contradistinction, if you like, and referred to ijtihad and taqlid as two mutual exclusive entities, in terms of answering this, we can talk about that kind of limited ijtihadi way of thinking that possessed and remained within those people exercising taqlid. So it's not just mere blind activity. Other scholars have talked about religious authority and the madhab tradition, because this is how you need to understand taqlid. It's about accepting and adhering and relying on these authorities. So the way that we understand taqlid is a way of accepting and understanding the authority of the madhab tradition. So what it is more a justified acknowledgement of authority than what Western scholarship referred to as blind submission. It's more a justified acknowledgement of the authority of the madhab rather than what the West called as blind submission. So this seventh category, I'll just finish on this here if I can get to it. Where, I'm sorry about that, the battery's going to make, I'll just put on charge. So this seventh category here, although Allama refers to it, and both Ibn Kamal Pasha and Ibn Abidin and many others, as just merely a nighttime wood gatherer, is actually much more profound than this. That's only in the sense of departing, diverting from the master authority and the immediate companions to something which actually involves a lot of sophistication. So the exercise of taqlid happened with great sophistication and very admirable originality. So I will end it on there, and I will take some of the. I think I can open the chat screen myself. Sheikh Hassan, I apologize again if I'm going over time here.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes. Would you like to open the chat screen up?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of interest and questions and answers. Questions, sorry. I don't know if you would like to maybe open up yourself, or do you want me to just throw one, two at you?
I can open up, and I've got the chat screen open here, so I can take
That's
one.
fine. There's some comments. There's some comments that perhaps challenge you as well. So maybe you can
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, that's the nature of what I do as a profession, so I'm happy to do that. I mean, I'm always encouraging challenging debates, especially with this type of topic as well, and what we had before. So we have something about Hassan. If there's anything in particular, Sheikh Hassan, if you want me to take, I can take it. So something has come up about al-fiqh, and maybe I'll just take this one very quickly. Right. So again, talfiq is something that you find very common in modernist Islamic legal discourse, which is something that I would be wary of exercising without great care, attention, and precaution. Shah Waliullah has a risala on an epistle on this, which you can read, which kind of puts some parameters on this use of talfiq. One example I would give you, and I think this came up in the previous question, and I would give an example from the Hanafi school, which is about going and to other madhabs, especially when we have this notion of taqlid in which we follow the authorities. So in what ways can we actually go out of the madhab? The whole discussion that I had was within the school. And now we have people saying, why do we have to remain within the school? But especially if there is a particular opinion in the school which is causing undue hardship. And an example of this can be given of mafqud al-khabar husband. So the missing husband whose whereabouts is unknown. We know that in the Hanafi school, the opinion is that if a wife's husband is absent, the absentee husband, then what is the process for divorce, because the husband has not formally enacted or pronounced the divorce. So what should she do if the husband is missing for many years? So the school of the Hanafis, and it's sometimes I wonder how people say sometimes the Hanafi school is the easiest school to follow. I mean, I say no school is easier than the other. It's all based on methodology and principle. The opinion of the Hanafi school is that when the age of the husband reaches 90 or 120, the madhab went to 90, that's when the divorce would happen. Once the age reaches that age, because they want to be certain that he would not return and therefore not be able to establish marital life again. Well, the scholars of the school took the opinion of the Maliki school, which was that if the husband has disappeared and is absent, then after the time of reporting it to the court, they should wait 4 years. Once an announcement has been made and attempts have been made to inform the husband that he is missing, then 4 years they would wait. And this is mentioned by Alama ibn Abidin and mentioning earlier authorities like Imam Kohstani and others, that we will give the opinion on the school of the Malikis. So what I would say here, it needs to be restrained in the sense that it needs to come from the great imams of the school or the great muftis of the school in the day, who are able to understand those principles and understand the rulings of the school in a very deep and profound way, that they are able to, in very limited circumstances, go out of the school. Because as soon as you drop and you leave your methodology, like I was saying, then you've lost the methodology of the school and Islamic law in its essence.
Okay. Sorry, Dr. Mustafa Baig, I think we've slightly gone over time here. So if I've got the questions. I've got the questions on a sheet. So what I'll do is, if I can send them to you, and perhaps if you'd be kind enough to make a short video or something on it.
Okay. Yeah, if you like, you can send them across. I'd be happy to answer them.
And we'll update that, because there's some really interesting stuff. Why, what's the legality of this categories? Why do we take Kamal Pashazada as on the stuff? But and I don't.
Mufti Mustafa Baig, the Azhari scholar who passed away in 1935, he's criticized it. So I did mention that.
Good. And I know I don't want, some of the answers, obviously, we want them detailed. I know we don't want to rush it to 1 2 minutes. So I think that would be good for us. So hopefully Dr. Mustafa Baig will, I've noted everyone's, even their comments down, and I will share them with him. So I would just like to thank Dr. Mustafa Baig Saab for a very academic and an engaging discussion. And inshallah, we're just going to finish up now for the day.